Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I am your host, Marianne Petrie. Bradley's mother, Narcissistic Judges, passed away in the fall. Bradley is autistic and needs structured routine and therapies he receives for his autism 6 days a week. However, Italy just entrusted Bradley to the Italian Social Services. If he is ruled to go back, he will then face the next 3 to 4 years in the Italian foster care system where he can't speak or understand the language. He will then be taken away from the only family he has ever known. Please call Governor Hochul, New York State, 518-474-8390. That's Governor Hochul, 518-474-8390 to please keep Bradley here safe in these United States. Hashtag keep Bradley safe. And also, if you could please go to the site, pleasedoyourjob.com. We need about 2,000 more signatures to get a case reopened. That's pleasedoyourjob.com. And I have a return guest on. I'm so happy to have Laurie Reynolds back on. She was last on season 5, episode 26, where we talked about the dangers of CPS infiltration into these domestic violence shelters. And we're going to talk about CPS getting involved in your case and how to avoid the process which leads us all into family court. So I welcome you back, Laurie Reynolds. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you on. You know, it just seems like a desperate process when you've got domestic violence going on and then you're trying to go to a shelter, and then somehow CPS shows up.
Well, and they did, in my experience. Obviously, they had come in and even had testified for me during the CPS case. There had been a couple of dependency hearings where the advocates had actually showed up and talked. And generally, they are told they're not allowed to do that. Domestic violence shelters have their own attorneys, but they were so compelled by Gray and Sky's case that they literally, Lisa literally asked me, could I please go up and testify for you? And had stated that the mental health issues that they had accused me of come from domestic violence, and had addressed the judge and said, Judge, you know that this is true, and it was simply just depression and anxiety. And obviously, at least 50% of Americans have depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't, and obviously it had made it clear, I had attorneys say, well, obviously this is coming from the fact that you took the children out of the home.
Mm-hmm.
And again, in the state of Florida, it's all about, I had talked about this. It's all about ignoring the facts. Hey, it's just ignoring the facts as usual, ignoring the children when they are crying for help, when they're saying they're in fear. And at this point, the children, I speak to them through social media at this point. And they leave the door open that way, and they're reading my messages, but it seems as if everything is under sort of a cloak of darkness. Again, the amount of control that they are under, and the amount of control a lot of these children are under with a lot of these parents, means that they almost have to live a secret life. But yes, in this case, the domestic violence shelters, they do ask them for information. Now, the Betty Griffin Center that I was in had protected, they're told to protect, obviously, the files. Everything is confidential. Since I had started counseling before I had actually filed for dissolution of marriage, they would not release the records. Obviously, they're not going to release the records. They're not going to release the records, but they press them. And, again, there are steps in order to even avoid the domestic violence shelter. I am not telling people, obviously, we have to be very vigilant about our mental health, but obviously, there are other ways to get through it.
Well, I know like friends will offer you to stay with them, or they may be afraid to offer you to stay with them because they don't want violence coming into their home.
Well, and this is a part of, and that's true. It is actually a fairly important subject as well, even extended family. The dangers, though, and what I've learned which didn't talk about last time, the dangers of actually losing members of your family is very large when you are trying to break an abuse cycle.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to break this cycle, it has to be, and I've told people, I'm a cancer survivor, and I tell people all the time, I even told my children this when they were here for Thanksgiving. I told them, I'd actually rather have cancer again than go through this.
Mm-hmm.
This is the most unbelievable. This is more trying than when I was a tiny child. A
Mm-hmm.
tiny child, 3 years old, I was diagnosed. I had treatments for 3.5 years, but even this is more trying. This hurts way more, right? And I think it's a testament to, honestly, to the sort of shift we've been seeing in people understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health. But
Mm-hmm.
in my experience, the effects on mental health, what I've been reading about as far as judicial betrayal, there have been, the American Psychological Association has gone into many peer-reviewed journals talking about the effects of judicial betrayal and what that does to mental health. That does affect generations of children.
Well said. I couldn't say that any better.
It's about, and in fact, I've been reading the articles, and it's actually motivated me at this point. I'm actually doing a Master of Science in Psychology at Regent University at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I have one professor, Dr. Wiles, who had I was surprised, I suppose it's fate, had told me that a final paper that needs to be done should be done on an article that I had offered to him, even though I had given him options, on judicial betrayal.
Ooh.
It is an article called Mental Health and Judicial Betrayal. And it talks about the effects of coercive control
Mm-hmm.
and what judges allow and how this is affecting psychologists. This is affecting their community. This is why they have many clients. This is, and I believe that there are solutions for that too. There are certainly solutions for what is happening in court.
Mm-hmm. I don't know, with these solutions, some people run into there's so much collusion and conflict of interest, and the judge is going along with it because they're getting paid off. Then what?
And that's true, and that may actually, completely delegitimize the issues that I believe that are in the court. I believe this one was definitely paid off. Again, the final order, which many attorneys and generally people ask me about, had said, that the children should not be returned because of a lack of full-time employment. Which is absolutely illegal in the state of Florida. So it does sound like it is a situation where he was paid off. I think the even deeper issues do fall under the fact that I think the system is wrong. I think there should be an implementation of tests for judges, and I kid you not.
Oh,
Not just,
okay.
do you? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've talked about it on your podcast before. Obviously these judges, we all know, were lawyers, right? But not
Yeah.
all lawyers are tested. But when you're a judge, I do not believe that in our society the judges should be under some special umbrella simply because they are elected. I
Mhm.
believe even anyone elected, anyone put on a ballot, should be tested under certain areas, including psychology.
Mhm.
Uh, there is no reason. They should be able to tell how to detect body language, how to detect liars, how to detect who is perjuring, who is committing perjury, who is bending the truth.
Mhm.
Understanding what people are really saying through their body language, I think but even psychology in general would be an unbelievable improvement in probably how judges would be able to read people.
Well, if they're going to do that, I'm worried that a lot of them are psychopaths and they understand a psychopath attorney. They can identify with that attorney.
And that may be true. Now, I understand that they're often that's true. There are often even narcissistic, judges as well. Yes, that is actually very true. Yeah, how do they work together? That is a good question. And obviously, this article that I've been reading and I have to study and actually write out about it, about judicial betrayal, is going to go into what exactly or how exactly this happens, right? How coercive control happens, right? This is what the article is going to really talk about.
That's going to be interesting. I mean, I'd like to read it when you're done.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, even, to post it on the podcast, obviously, or if you need to post it on your website or anything like that for the viewers, that would make a lot of sense. Absolutely. Just to sort of see what the process is. Again, it talks about what happens to the children, after this coercive control happens and they become a part of the system. But again, the steps that you said that would probably be helpful to parents, we could probably get into that about how exactly to avoid them first. I think that's really the number one issue here, is how to avoid them in the first place.
Definitely. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I always tell people to just try to avoid going into any courtroom. See if you can hopefully try to mediate. Hopefully, you're not dealing with a personality who drags you into court.
Well, again, I don't think in my case it was anything that could be avoided. Again, sometimes, obviously you probably have parents who, it's possible maybe CPS in the state did show up and they're not dealing with a toxic personality. We don't need to have, when we have a dissolution of marriage, we don't need to have a personality that's toxic. We do not need necessarily to have one of the parents or one of the parties have a disorder. That's not necessarily true. Now, and obviously some of the steps, they say first that if you have, an agent come knocking on your door, well, I call them agents.
Yeah,
They're
I
not
agree.
agents, they're de facto agency, obviously. And we talked about this, it's actually almost a subcontractor that the government hires. And they hire many, but what happens is that when they knock on the door, you read some sources that say that it's okay to step out of the house and close the door and don't let them in. Well, I remember when this happened for my third who has lived with me his whole life, the brother that is separated from gray and sky. When this happened with Silas, and I had an attorney at the time, I told my attorney that I didn't want to open the door. The reaction was that the attorney said, no, let them in. And I wasn't really good with that. It didn't really sit well with me. I said, well, they really shouldn't come in if they don't have a warrant. And that really is your right. American in the constitutional sense. Obviously, I'm very much a constitutionalist. Do not let them in. Obviously, you don't have a warrant. Don't come in. So some sources say step out, be polite, don't say much. But I think the bottom line really is to say every source states use it as if you're in an interrogation room. You don't say a thing, anything.
And don't
Sometimes you can if you read and if you watch a lot of these, I'm sure you have some listeners who watch a lot of true crime. If you watch true crime, you could tell. Look at the hardened criminals. Look at them sitting there. They do not say anything. And believe me, I was not the expert at this. During the dependency case, I was defending my children. That was the wrong move. And I can admit that now. That was the wrong move, that I was actually defending my children. I was saying it out loud. I was getting passionate about it. I was emotional about it. You know, this is exactly what they want you to do. And I think it's absolutely just amazing, because if you think about it, these social workers are trained to psychologically manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
They are actually trained to psychology. They're told how to do this. However, and they know so much about psychology, and yet we know that it must be the way that the system has been built,
Uh-huh.
when the judges don't know how to do that. But the social workers do, of course.
Mm.
So the steps are, if you do get a knock on the door, you know, obviously if they start banging, if it becomes, almost like a violent
Yeah.
sort of banging, you know, they say you can't open and close the door, but again, act like you're in an interrogation room,
Mm-hmm.
stand, ask for card, ask for information, ask for what is the accusation, then say, you will be speaking to my attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Have a good day. Turn around and walk in. Do not make it any more than that. Don't give them any information. Don't answer the accusation. And above all, just like all of the other parents that I've been working with to get our children out, like all of the really smart parents talk about, always record.
Yes. Yes.
I'm sure you've had guests say that before.
Mm-hmm.
Always record. Always record. Hey, come on, most of you guys, you people, everybody listening, hey, most of you have a smartphone. Come on, let's go. Most of you have a smartphone. Most of us, now maybe some of you have flip phones. Most of you have smartphones. Record.
Mm-hmm.
Record. You have a recorder on your phone. You step out, you record. Everything is given to an attorney. However, no one wants to hear my experience with the 7 attorneys I've hired over the past 6.5 years, 7, and no one wants to hear about that experience. But I think you may want to get into getting an attorney. Like I said, you don't want to hear my experience, but
Mm-hmm.
but if they keep knocking, I would say, maybe call a couple, have them on standby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if these workers knock again, yeah, then it's probably time to get one. Yeah, now you're talking, if they come back later, they come back a week later,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you want to protect your children. The issue was that, and I obviously didn't know this, a long time ago when I moved here with Gray. He was 2 years old, but in the state of Florida, there are a couple of states that social workers are not allowed to speak to children in schools. In my situation with Gray and Sky, there are a couple. I believe I've heard maybe. I'm not too well versed in that law, but I believe Montana may be one of them, that says that children should not or cannot be spoken to without the parents' permission. Not true in Florida. There are some of the 50 states that do not allow them to do that. But in the case of Gray and Sky, they came in and talked to them,
Mm-hmm.
talked to Gray, and manipulated him. Now, in these states, this is where it gets a little tricky. Okay, so even if you have an attorney, the attorney is not going to know that they walked in.
Right.
This is tricky. Okay. And even like in our situation where it was simply the children understanding that we had escaped to a safe house, they'll still use that against you in some way.
Uh-huh.
Well, we were the victims, we're the survivors, but they're going to use that still in some way. And again, in the end, what I tell people is that in my situation, why it has to go to a higher court at this point, the lower court is way too scared to talk to me. I contact them, but they are way too scared to even have hearings. I call for hearings, motion for hearings. They don't respond. At this point, they know that it's of a higher level at this point. It's actually in higher courts. So it's a matter of, can you avoid simply talking to them? Another tip obviously would be, and I talked about this last time, never sign anything.
Yeah.
Never
Yeah.
sign anything. Even if they say they're going to cut off your hand, never sign anything. Don't sign anything. I had been forced to sign under duress by an attorney. But again, the other plaintiffs, the other parents that I've been talking to, they were under the same situation. They also fell under duress. They talk about how they signed something, but they didn't read anything. They had attorneys telling them. So this is not uncommon.
Right.
Or you come into the hearing and someone tries to manipulate you. The issue is, honestly, how strong are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you be manipulated mentally? Are you really able to be manipulated mentally? Are you?
I know I was. I didn't see this coming. Especially when someone's an empath, they don't see this stuff coming. And I unfortunately let this witch in, who is Lilith Bean in my first book. So I renamed her after a demonic entity. But when she was screaming at me in my living room, she handed me a blank piece of paper, and it just said, there was a line on it, and she said, just sign this. It just shows that I was here. Something like that. So I stupidly signed it. That could be attached to any paperwork, people.
And I wanted, obviously, yes, Mary Ann knows about this, definitely. And this is, again, they don't tell you what you're signing, which actually makes, in the end, the issue is that it's technically being enforced. But whatever you're signing, any listeners, whatever you've signed, it's actually void. The contract is void. So it really actually doesn't matter. So my children being in the other household, the household of the abuser, it's actually void. It's so if you have listeners that are, have signed something, I will guarantee you that you didn't read all of it. No, you didn't. I will tell you. And I've run into so many parents. Again, contract law is not something that we're educated on. And, the U.S. Department of Education is not going to spend time telling people, we need to educate you on your rights, because they're not going to do that. They're not going to educate you on your constitutional rights in public school. That's not what they want you to know. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that a contract is only valid if you've read it and if you understand it. So the issue is what Child Protective Services uses are the gray areas. The gray areas of, well, we can't prove whether you read it or not. That's how they're trained, right? So we know that they're trained in that way. Well, I don't know. You signed it, so I guess you read it, didn't you? I mean, this is why the smartest parents that I talk to who are caught up in this kidnapping, trafficking ring, always record everything.
Yes, I should have done that.
And I didn't either, because we were caught up in domestic violence, counseling.
Uh-huh.
I was caught up in, the actual disillusion in general. And
Mhm.
obviously it was fairly apparent that the abuser was the one who contacted them
Yes.
because the judge had started talking about how we need to start changing the time sharing because mom is doing the classes that I'm asking her to do and she's almost done. Okay, well, since she's almost done, we're going to talk about time sharing. So he calls. Another big issue that parents talk about that I do think needs to be changed
Mhm.
is the fact that reporters are anonymous.
Right. Thank you.
Absolutely a constitutional that in itself actually in this case is unconstitutional. That is unconstitutional. In the United States Constitution, it states that if someone accuses you of a crime, you have a right to know your accuser.
Uh-huh.
That is constitutional.
Well,
That is absolutely constant. You are not allowed, since the beginning, our founding fathers, this is the kind of department the founding fathers would be rolling in their graves
oh, they
over.
are.
Oh, by far, this is this is the kind of department, governmental department, that number one, they didn't even intend for in the very beginning. The Constitution had only 11 departments, 11 departments in which the government had to run. That was their intention. Their intention was only, and you have examples like, the United States Postal Service,
Mhm.
obviously that's one. I think, maybe libraries are another, city halls. You're talking about the general services of the government, right? So you're talking along those lines. That's what the government was there for, was for these general things like mail, roads. Roads was another one. That was another original one, right?
Mhm.
But as soon as we started, I think it's a good example. Obviously it was around way before the civil rights movement, but there are some good things that came out of the civil rights movement. There are some really bad things that came out of the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
This is a civil rights issue, obviously. All of these parents, these children who are trapped, has to affect their civil rights, right?
Mhm.
So in the end, what had happened? Well, again, the government went too far. So what do? I think it was Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, who had said, obviously,
Mhm.
had said, I'm paraphrasing, one of the most terrifying things you could hear is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Ugh. Sorry, yeah.
That is a very famous quote from him, right? And obviously, this is not something that you think about when you're escaping abuse. You don't really think about those things. But this is what happens. The government really isn't here to help you in the end. Now that's my personal feeling. They're
Mm.
not here to help you. They're here to manage, essentially. Now
Mhm.
that may be something that U.S. nationals, will speak more about. People who do not identify themselves as U.S. citizens, but they call themselves U.S. nationals,
Mm.
and they essentially they work more around the Constitution. But again, I'm not a member of that yet.
Huh. Huh. I just yeah, I mean, it's also traumatizing when you get a call from CPS and they're saying, "Oh, we'd like to come over to your house, it's a good time." And it's like, "Okay." You just don't even you're already caught off guard. And if I had to do this all over again, I would definitely tell my kids that when they haul you out of your classroom and disturb your learning activities, tell the caseworker, "I'm not speaking to you until my attorney is present. I really
Teach,
regret."
teaching the children that, yes, absolutely, yeah, and obviously, yeah, that's true if you can in the very beginning. That's true. You don't plan for that, but in this day and age, obviously, last year, it was the year before that too. I'm sure a lot of the listeners had heard of the reports of parents who were being arrested at PTA meetings because they were defending there was one father who was in the front lines, who was arrested for defending his daughter because his daughter was raped in a high school bathroom. And he was arrested, I suppose, for being unruly. There were senators who started having meetings with the Department of Justice. Senators that were reprimanding the Department of Justice. Garland reprimanding him on the stand, saying, there is no. So even representatives are at least pretending to understand that there is an issue. They know that the issue was there. But it almost seems as if some of these senators and representatives think that somehow this issue fluctuates. No, it doesn't. Even in the Constitution when it was written, the founding fathers knew that this sort of situation is circular. So what happens is there can be times in which the people can defend their rights and they have more power than the government, but it goes into a circle in which sometimes it escalates and it goes the other way, and the government has more power than the people. And as it states in the Constitution, when that happens, you need a revolution. They understood, and the writing is in there, they understood it is not going to be a single line. Most of us who have not been caught up in this, again, the biggest issue and the most frustrating issue are people, the general public, who have not been caught up with CPS, who believe that there is always something wrong with the parents who are accused. This is the most frustrating thing I have ever encountered. Like I said, I'd rather have cancer again. There is no, no, I mean, really, there is nothing worse than being separated from my kids. There is nothing. That's and again, another testament to the fact that mental health is just as important as physical health. And I think, again, that's turning around. Sometimes you see more commercials now where they talk more about people taking care of their minds. You see that a little bit more. Sometimes you see these commercials. I think it's starting to turn around. I think people are really, even though, psychology has been around since 1879 in experimental psychology. It had its roots in philosophy, and it had its roots in physiology. But it has become even more than experiment. We understand that the effects on the children are so astronomical. It's hard to even believe, as I told you, it was kind of a strange moment. The abuser allowed the children to be here during Thanksgiving. And it was an amazing blessing. It was an amazing blessing. I found out why later on. And for a couple of weekends before that too. But the things that I observed psychologically, I'm not a psychologist. I've been in counseling, obviously, since the beginning, since before filing the divorce. So, I mean, and you know about that. And that, I've been in counseling, but that doesn't make you a psychologist. The things that I noticed in the children were mind-boggling. Completely different children. Completely different. I could give examples, but, they were with their brother. Their brother is the only one of the four of us who has not been traumatized. He does not have a lifetime of trauma. He has lived with me. And so he is a very different person. Silas is very happy-go-lucky. He's a very happy-go-lucky kid. He has no worries. He doesn't have a care in the world. And when he was with his brother and sister, he was very affectionate. They didn't know how to take it. His sister would push him away.
Mm.
I had spoken to other organizations about this. She was curling up into a ball.
Mm.
She was telling him to go away. He was showing many signs of abuse, many signs. I noticed how Gray and Sky don't hug each other. They don't kiss on the cheek. They spend a lot of time separated. Even when they were at the house here at home together, at their real home together, they are not affectionate. They don't know how to communicate. To them, for the most part, they will communicate about pretend. So they have, in essence, it seems, created their own worlds in order to escape.
Mm-hmm.
So this is obviously what's happening to our children. But I'm still messaging them, but it was not a surprise that the abuser pulled back and is violating the order at this point that states that the children should be with their family at least once a month. So he is violating that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So he's pulled all the way back in the alienation. So obviously the children had stated something to him. There was obviously something that had offended. And this is what happens with coercive control that I was talking about with judicial betrayal. This is what happens. Obviously, the children had said something. A couple of the things that the children had told me were, most of the time, not every time I took them back, but most of the time, as I was driving them back, they would say, I don't want to go back. And they were starting with the same language that they had during the dependency case. And it took me all the way back.
Mm.
It took me all the way back to during the dependency case when they would say those things, when they would say, I don't want to go back. I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when, and at this point, obviously I have, a legal team that is telling me you will not adhere to supervised visitation because that's accepting it. That is what I have been told at this point. You will not accept supervised. You are not going to. So now, like I said, I'm only accepting unsupervised. He's pulling back, and I did. And it was obviously the way it should have been. They never should have been taken in the first place. But since the very beginning, they did this coercive control against the judge. It being paid off. Those things are beyond my scope as far as how it works, who gets paid off, and obviously you would know more about that, Mary.
Mm. Well, as you know, I've been seeing a counselor since, what was it, 2012, 2013, to deal with people that need to see a counselor. And she had told me, because she also worked with the courts, but she told me, I'm going to say an expletive, it's not who you know, it's who you blow. And there's a lot of clerks in those courthouses that have more power than the judge. But that's another podcast in itself.
That is absolutely something I didn't know either. Now, some of the clerks absolutely, and sometimes I would go into during the dependency case. I was so frequent inside the courthouse that the judicial assistant knew who I was, first name basis. That's how often I was in the dependency area. Now, in St. Johns County, Florida, the dependency area, I don't know if it's the same thing in every courthouse. I'm sure it's not. But they hide the dependency office all the way in the back. I find that very interesting. When you walk through
right.
Is that what you found? Is that the same in your courthouse?
It's in the basement. I found they called it a conciliation. They called it conciliation conference.
Of course. Yeah, it was just for your, convenience and such. Oh, of course. So you walk in, right? And they, you obviously go through the gate and, do you have any metal? Yeah, blah, 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 metal detector.
Right.
but it's all the way in the back. Like you go right past family law, you go past tickets, traffic tickets. Where's dependency? Oh, it's all the way in the back, right? It's down this dark hallway. I kid you not. Dark hallway, no lights, just a dark hallway. And you walk in, and then there's this, it's reminiscent of, the listeners, parents that are listening right now, it's reminiscent of the mafia. It always has been. It really is. I mean, don't be fooled. I mean, the government has certain factions that may act as the mafia. Of course they do. Of course they do.
But the mafia has more class.
they wear their suits and they go out there. Yeah. Now, and you walk in, they have, some lights, and like you said, it's sort of like a basement. You walk in, there's some sort of lights. Sure. Christina would come in, look at me and say, Laurie, hi, Laurie, what did you need?
Oh, man.
That's what they would say to me. Hi, Laurie, what would you need? Yeah. What do you mean? I need my kids. What are you talking about? Why are you asking me this question when you know what I've been saying from the very beginning? What do you mean? And I would be like, I want records. And I remember going in there and saying, I want records. Many parents that I speak to, obviously, they're under the same issue, which is that they charge a lot of money for copies, and they do that on purpose. They charge a lot of money, $1 a page, and when you have 250 pages, 275, whatever was in the dependency case. Yeah, I mean, and you sort of go, well, I guess you can invest in that, and eventually, I've gotten to the point where I'm saying, well, the courts that I'm working in now, I mean, they're going to go in, they're going to tell them to relinquish them, to a certain extent. So, and that, again, another fascinating aspect is that with some of the parents that I've spoken to, not just me, they completely ignore indigency status. That's another thing that I've noticed. Now, indigency is obviously stating that you do not have the money to file, right? So it's interesting how they ask for money for other things. It's so fascinating. It depends on the department who's speaking to you, right? They'll say, well, no, but you owe money on fraudulent child support. And I'm like, well, no. I don't pay fraudulent child support. I'm not going to pay child support that is based on fraud.
That's a good point.
And that's what I've been told too, right? Now, so you write letters, to the bureaus and the credit bureaus, and that's part of the mess that they try to create, right?
Oh yeah.
You give in, or we financially destroy you. Trying to financially destroy you. We literally pull everything from your credit. So what do you, again, in the beginning you had stated, well, what do? You don't say anything. Again, everything with these people is like an interrogation room. You watch true crime and you see the hardened criminals. And again, we're not the same because we're not criminals. But you see these hardened criminals, they will not say anything in the interrogation room. You don't say anything to these people. Like, again, it's like saying something to a postal worker. You have to treat them the same. Say it's a postman. Well, you don't tell the postman anything. I'm going to tell you something. No, you are the same as you are a government worker. That's all you are. So think of them. I think maybe a tip would be, if they come to the door, which is very hard to do, treat them like a postal worker. Like, think of a postman coming to your door and saying, hey, can I talk to you about your children? What?
Yeah.
No? Well, what is it? Why are you here? You always ask, step outside the door, close the door, ask what the accusation is. Again, I learned this later. I didn't do that.
Oh, we all,
I didn't do that. Yeah. Step outside. What's the accusation? Record it all. Well, the accusation is that your child came to school saying that you hit him. It'll be something like that. Or a neighbor said that they saw, she saw you hit him in the backyard or something, and I'm making something up.
Mm-hmm.
You record the whole thing. I need a copy of your card. I need your business card. I need a copy of any paperwork that you have there. I'll be here. You'll be hearing from my attorney. You have a good day, and walk back in. It's really essentially, think of it as gathering information. That's what I learned later. Think of it as gathering information. That's what it is. So it's just like, well, you have a good day. I mean, you don't. Now, sometimes you see these amazing, I'm sure you have, Marianne, but you see these amazing TikTok videos. Now, this is another way to go, but these amazing TikTok videos of parents who, confront them the way I did during the dependency case.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some of fathers who say, you've come here over and over, raising his voice. You've come here over and over. There's no reason for you to be here. Why exactly are you here? You don't have a right to, and he actually made another good point. This is something else that people can say. Mm-hmm. His really good point was, you don't have a right to be on my property. That's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. And he's right. If you tell someone to leave, yeah, they should. Do you have a door? Yeah, you have a door. But if you tell someone to leave, that's your right.
Yeah, see, people don't know, and or they're too nice, and or they're naive.
And that's true. There is a sort of naivete where escaping abuse. Again, they say that the most abusive time and the most dangerous time is leaving abuse. Mm-hmm. Is the actual act of leaving. This is where the institution of coercive control comes in. This is where judicial betrayal comes in. This is where judges don't defend. And again, in the research, this particular peer-reviewed journal called Mental Health and Judicial Betrayal, I'm sure will go into the details specifically of what happens and how it happens. And it does focus specifically on mothers. I know you may have a lot of fathers, and of course, that's just as important. That's just as important. But it does focus on mothers. What happens when a lot of times mothers, 95%, Dr. Lundy Bancroft would talk about how 95% of the people that he would treat were women. 5% were men. That's true. Now, that is also because a lot of men do not report abuse. Mm-hmm. Right? So societally, the effects of society, right? Men do not report abuse. This is sort of what's happening there. That's why we see 95% women. And he would talk about how, these effects on the mental health is again, like I tell you, I'm still doing counseling. There have been bouts where I've sort of stopped for a little bit, but I'm still doing counseling now, and it's pretty amazing all the things that they try to tell me about coping skills. And again, the bottom line though is getting the children home. So it's not, sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you don't want to think about coping. It's not about coping, it's about solving it, right?
Right.
When you're a very goal-oriented person, you're like, the children are in danger. They are sitting in danger, and no one is doing anything about it.
And that's the judicial betrayal.
And there was only one moment, and like I said, one hearing in which it seemed, of all of the hearings that I went to, I never missed a hearing. I never missed a counseling. Obviously, I needed to be with my kids. So I obviously went to the counseling at their schools, at these centers. Sky was confused. She would ask me, probably one of the most horrible moments of the entire dependency case is putting her into the car seat in the DCF car after one of our counseling sessions. And it was kind of weird. And you're asking me why, like, why am I doing this? Well, the worker had apparently said, oh, Laurie, you can put her into the car seat. I'm going to talk to Guy's counselor for a minute. Probably should have recorded that. I put Sky into the car seat, and she looked at me at the age of 2. She's not 3 yet. She's 2 years old. And she looks at me inquisitively, that my perfect daughter, and says, what happened?
Oh.
And I lose it. I absolutely lose it. I look at Sky and I say, and she's 8 now. I look at her and I say, I'm fighting to get you home. I want you home. I'm fighting to get you home. It's not you and it's not me. And you try to explain it to a 2-year-old. It's not you and it's not me. And that's kind of hard. But she's 2, and and she, she has an understanding. So you can't sort of think of it as younger children. They don't really get it. That's very insulting. I don't like hearing that either. I hate hearing that. I hate hearing people talking about, acting as if children are not aware. They're absolutely aware. I get so tired of people saying the phrase that absolutely just irritates me to the core is children are resilient. Makes me, then obviously you've heard that, makes me angry.
Yes.
With all that fiery passion.
Yes.
With just the.
Oh, I agree, because children are not resilient with this stuff. And these abrupt, rude caseworkers, I don't know how you feel, but I don't even call them social workers because they're not intelligent enough.
Well, what I actually read, and obviously anybody can look it up, but what I've actually read, that's true. What I've actually read is that sometimes you only need an associate's degree.
Right.
I heard that, which is 2 years of college. That's 2, which is barely there. It's barely there. So imagine having 12 years, you graduate high school, you have a high school diploma, and 2 more years, and you can ruin the lives of families. That's it. All you need is 2 more years. You could go, hey, and then all of a sudden you're walking door to door saying, hi, I don't know if this is true. And a neighbor said that, you were yelling or screaming, you were in the backyard and you saw something, and, you know what I'm saying? And obviously, and again, not knowing, that's the bottom line. And I think that's the big issue. And actually a very large way in which a lot of these cases wouldn't be opened in the first place. I think it's designed in that way, that we don't know the accuser. Again, very unconstitutional, very unlawful. That in itself is absolutely unlawful.
Agreed.
It's it's illegal. I mean, and maybe if we lived in other countries, now most countries in the world now have constitutions, right? But in a time when most countries did not have constitutions, yeah, maybe that would have flown. But it's reminiscent of incredibly old governments, of old governmental societies. It's reminiscent of monarchies, in fact. It's, when a king or a queen, a lord, could accuse you of something and you don't even know where it came from. This is reminiscent of Constitution. This is why the founding fathers were influenced by John Locke, by the Enlightenment, where we started saying that everyone has rights. So anyone who ignores the fact that children have rights are not educated in it enough. Children have rights.
Mm-hmm.
They were born on this soil, they have rights.
I am so glad I had you on this podcast, and I want you to come back on again.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Yeah.
This was beyond informative, and I'm so glad we talked. And there's so much more to talk about. So, how can people reach you if they have any questions?
Well, I did have an email address, savethegraysky@gmail.com, Gray and Sky, my children. But that's actually become fairly full. So now you can actually reach me at Laurie Reynolds Viking@gmail.com. So that would be LaurieReynoldsViking@gmail.com. That is where people can reach me. That's always there. And as of right now, studying a Master of Science in Psychology in order to help my children get through this. But again, it's still been a passion of mine, even before the domestic violence. But it's pretty amazing the things that I'm finding out. And in psychology, it rests under the psychology of violence. It's interesting. So, in psychology, everybody likes to think of psychology as clinical psychology. Mm-hmm. That's only one of about 54 different factions of psychology. Psychology is used everywhere. But in crime, there's criminal psychology, but that's more centered around, obviously, those who commit crime. But the psychology of violence, when we're talking about what happens to children and what happens to their brains, that's another faction. So the American Psychological Society or American Psychological Association has these peer-reviewed journals that talk about what is happening in society.
Oh, we're going to have an excellent podcast next time. Don't jump off, okay?
No problem.
Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth, and Raised by These Wolves, How Family and Federal Courts Are Failing Our Children. You can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple iTunes, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, other platforms I don't even know about. And feel free to buy me a cup of coffee to keep this podcast going. And I totally thank you, Laurie Reynolds. You will be back.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you for doing this for Gray and Sky and Silas especially.
Most definitely.